Fear Factor, 15 Minutes to Your Ideal Retirement, Webinar 6. Would you like to build a tax-free money machine? Hello, this is Adrienne Berg with financial advisor Ronald Gielak, answering your questions in a 12-part webinar series on how to retire and live the life you love and deserve. This is the 6th webinar in our series, and you can find the other 5 at ronaldgielak.com. That's G-E-L-O-K. In the preceding webinar, we discussed why tax-free is like a pact with the devil. In this webinar, we go further, and we ask, how can we build a tax-free money machine? Ron, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Adrienne.
Well, you know, you have often said that there are 3 ways to create a tax-free money machine using different systems. The theme throughout the past webinars has been that we don't just make a retirement plan, we don't just make investments, we actually create a system that makes a difference in all of the important aspects of our financial life. So let's take a look at each of these systems that you have in mind.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at systems, certainly one system we could look at is the idea of the Roth IRA. Now, when a person is funding a Roth IRA, they do not get an upfront tax deduction like they do with a traditional IRA. But the way I like to look at it is if we were farmers and we had the option of paying taxes on the seed that we were buying at the start of the season, or paying taxes on the sale of the ultimate harvest at the end of the season, which would we prefer?
First one.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the same thing when we talk about the Roth IRA. So to the extent that a person may be eligible to make Roth IRA contributions, they should do so. Now, unfortunately, the government limits a person's ability to make Roth IRA contributions as their level of income goes up. So the idea that we struggled with for a while was to say, could we find a system that could empower an individual to grow money free from current taxes like a Roth IRA would? Could we find a system that would empower a person to pull tax-free distribution, spendable money without incurring tax? And could we, in turn, have a system where the money could ultimately be passed income tax-free to family members at time of death? And so we kind of, how can I put it, we designed a system around indexed life. But there's so many misconceptions whenever I mention life insurance that it requires an education process that we go through with clients to bring them up to speed on how to correctly design an indexed life policy to perform in a advantaged or superior fashion. See, the media just conditions us when it comes to life insurance to believe that, well, you know, when we're younger, we should just get the cheapest term insurance we can find, and that's when we have a mortgage balance, and that's when our kids' educations are yet unfunded. And then they tell us when we get older, we should just drop the insurance because who needs the expense anymore? Now, what we do is we look at it and say, well, there's certain tax code provisions that are extremely favorable towards insurance, which is what? The ability to grow a cash value free from current tax and the ability to access the cash value free from taxation through the tax-free policy loan. So we want to show clients how to do that using indexes for the growth of the cash value, and we want to do it in such a way that we minimize the mortality charges or cost of insurance.
Now, part of your system is that by using indexed life insurance, you're actually participating in the stock market with a floor or a protection. That's a very important feature for people who are pre or just post-retirement. Can you explain that particular feature to us and how that works with the system?
Yeah. Let's put it this way. You're not participating directly in the stock market in the sense that a direct participation in the stock market through, say, an indexed mutual fund would involve what? Potential for gain, but at the same time risk of loss.
Right.
What is it that, Adrian, what is it we keep hearing from our clients? People we serve keep saying, look, I want to avoid, to the extent that it makes sense for me, downside risk. I want to avoid loss. So this concept of indexing is to say, what if we're able to have an agreement with an insurance company where our return is linked to the performance of a market index like the S&P 500 index. And so let's say we have an index life program and the insurance company says you can get 100% of what the S&P 500 does up to a cap of 13 or 14%. So what does that mean? It means if the S&P goes up 15, 18% and our cap is 14%, well, we made 14%. But on the other hand, if it's a year like 2008 and the S&P drops 39%, we did not lose a penny, and we still have the prior year's index-linked interest credit available to us. It didn't go away.
Yes, I think that the greatest fear we have, and of course we call this entire series Fear Factor, false evidence affecting retirement, but our fear is that we're out of control. And this puts some control. Yes, there may be the price to pay that you don't have the full upside, but most people, pre- and post-retirement, would be willing to take their 13 or 14% cap, knowing that their loss could not be as devastating as it was in the year 2000 or 2008. But some people still are interested in full participation, and there's another system that you alluded to in webinar 5, which is separate money management. What do you mean by separate money management as opposed to what most people think of as money management?
Okay. What we're referring to is what's called separately managed accounts. These are typically what's sometimes known as institutional money management for individuals. And the idea here is to say, well, what if we have available a platform where a person can have an investment account, they can have us give them direction or guidance on what money managers to choose, and we have no limits on what we can earn. And by choosing the correct money manager or the correct portfolio manager, we're trying to limit our downside exposure. That's a system that makes sense for people who say, well, I like the idea of being empowered with safety and with guarantees, and I'm intrigued by the new and innovative offerings that some of the insurance companies are providing us, but clearly I can't put all of my funds in offerings from insurance companies, and we would never suggest that anybody do that. But there's really a better way to go than just having money sit idle in certificates of disappointment at the local bank.
Right.
And there's a better way to go than assuming massive risks of loss by trying to pick the mutual fund that did the best over the last 12 or 36 months.
This particular series of webinars is really targeted to a particular audience, people who may be post-retired or just thinking about retirement. And so one of the things they know is health care issues. We hear all the time that the average couple, even with Medicare, will spend $225,000 during their lifetime out of pocket for health care because there's a lot that isn't covered. And I know that you've got a third feature to your system that does help that particular big problem that many of us are totally unprepared to face. Can you describe that part of the system?
Yeah, I can. But just before I do that, though, I just want to approach it in a broader context that what really, if you think about what people are looking at as they plan for retirement or if they're already in retirement, is a sense of control. So many people today feel that they're out of control, and what we want to do is give them the ability to be back in control. And what do we mean by that? Well, to the extent that we use systems that give the ability to control loss, to the extent that we use systems that give the ability to control or limit taxes, to the extent that we use systems that protect against the extraordinary expenses of catastrophic illness, then we're empowering our clients. And our clients are people who want to be empowered. They may have been very successful in their particular field of endeavor, but they're smart enough to know that they can't be an expert in everything and that they could use some help. So when we get to this issue of catastrophic illness occurring later in life, sometimes it can't be avoided. If I look at my own parents, when my parents entered their 70s, they both were in good health. My father was taking a blood pressure pill and a cholesterol pill. My mother was taking a thyroid pill and something for osteoporosis. But neither one of them made it out of their 70s. Now, my father at 77 had a massive stroke, and it wasn't a stroke that was the kind that sends somebody to a nursing home the rest of their life. It was a stroke that ended his life. The problem that created at that point is my mother was now 6 years into an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and my dad had been her primary caregiver. So had we not done proper planning ahead of time, the financial losses would have amounted to everything they had worked a lifetime for. So what we want to do with clients is explore systems on how to protect their assets for the benefit of themselves, if they're married, their spouse, and ultimately for the benefit of children and grandchildren.
Now, some of those things are long-term care policies, and most people are concerned about premiums and continuing to pay premiums year after year as they get older. I know you have some solutions for that.
Well, sure, because what happens is sometimes people will go to, well, I hate to refer to it as a financial generalist, but in my mind, that's what it is. And so this financial generalist will have this knee-jerk reaction of, well, somebody's concerned about catastrophic illness later in life. That means I should recommend traditional long-term care insurance to them. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with traditional long-term care insurance, provided that you get into it at a young enough age. Now, why do I say that? Well, because the rates on traditional long-term care insurance are not guaranteed. In fact, the actuaries have underestimated what the utilization of long-term care services would be. People, because of advances in medical technology, are living longer lifespans, and as a result, they're coping with increased frailty and disability over a longer lifespan. So we've got to think outside the box. Why? Because the premiums on traditional long-term care insurance are not guaranteed. We've seen major insurers in the last couple of years raise rates 40, 50%, even more on in-force policyholders. So we want to look for better ways to solve this. How am I going to fund a catastrophic illness later in life? So I can give you a couple of examples of this if you want some specifics, Adrienne.
Sure.
Okay, to give you one example, a lot of times a person will say, I don't have a traditional pension. I'm concerned about making sure I don't run out of income before I run out of breath, particularly if I live a long life or if my spouse lives a long life. So we might look to putting guarantees on a retirement account through what's known as a lifetime income benefit rider. Now, this may say for purposes of meeting future income needs that the account is guaranteed to compound at 6 or 6.5% per year, and then there's a specific level of income guaranteed for life. Now, we can take that type of rider added to a retirement account, and we can have a long-term care benefit on there that says, you know what, let's say you're guaranteed, I don't know, a 6% income for life at age 80, and then your health fails and you need home health care or assisted living or, God forbid, nursing home care. Now your income could double, say, to 12%. So what does that mean real world? Well, real world, it means, let's say you've got $40,000 a year of guaranteed lifetime income in retirement because of the planning we do. If you need long-term care, maybe that doubles to $80,000 per year for 5 years. So that's one thinking outside box solution. Another example is, let's say somebody says, you know what, I do have a pension, but you know what, when I pass away, my pension benefit is cut by 50% for my surviving spouse. And at the same time, my surviving spouse is going to lose one of the Social Security checks. So I don't want to impoverish my spouse. So we may recommend an inexpensive permanent life insurance plan to that client, but we might recommend a life policy that has what's called a chronic illness accelerated benefit rider, which means what? It means up to 96% of the death benefit can be accelerated for what? To pay for home health care, assisted living, or even nursing home expenses. And people will say, well, I didn't even know that existed. And that's the point I like to make to people, is that we don't know what we don't know. For example, a lot of people don't know that there's what's called a single premium long-term care life policy. And people go, well, what the heck is that? And the answer is this. Let's suppose you've got a 50 or 100,000 sitting in a money market account down at the local bank, and it's there because you want to keep that money liquid, and maybe it's there for a rainy day. Well, what rainy day could befall a person later in life? How about a change in health status? So the idea here is you could take that same 100,000 or 50,000, deposit it with an insurance company, and if you're 65 years old, they may say, hey, deposit the 100,000 with us into this long-term care life policy. If you pass away, there's a $120,000 or $140,000 income tax-free death benefit to your spouse or to your kids. But you know what? If you need long-term care, there might be $400,000 available to pay for home health care, assisted living, or long-term care. So what's the real cost of that type of plan? Well, it's the lost interest that you didn't make on the money market account. But what people
today,
like,
that's almost zero.
Exactly. And the other thing, you're not even going to believe this, Adrian, is these programs have 100% money-back guarantees. What does that mean? It means if something off the radar happens a year or two down the road and you say, you know what, that 50 or 100,000, guess what, I need it back, you can get it back, no questions asked, no penalties.
These are wonderful parts of systems and features of systems, lots of choices, lots of know-how. And as you say, you can create a tax-free money machine. You can protect yourself, but you have to know what you're doing. And most of us, frankly, need guidance. So now that we know that there are these choices, and of course so many more, and we want to create our own great retirement future, how does your organization help?
Well, we believe in taking a very, what I call, holistic approach, which means we want to help the whole person. So when we sit down with somebody, we're asking them what's really important to them about their future. What do they want to do with the balance of their lifetime? How do they want to spend their time? What do they want to do? And then we want to put together plans to help them accomplish their lifestyle objectives. So the whole idea here is if somebody says, I really see myself being able to spend the winter in a warmer climate, but at the same time I want to be close to my grandchildren the majority of the year, and I don't want to have to worry about, my monthly expenses or bills being met down the road, and I'm concerned about state taxes. We're going to address all these issues, catastrophic illnesses, or whatever blind spot a person may need to have addressed.
So I'm going to ask everybody who's listening whether they are really ready to spend the 15 minutes it takes to get the fear out of retirement and stop running with the herd. If so, then you want to start with a complimentary consultation with Ronald Gielach and Associates. And of course you want to register for our next webinar, which is called Why Do We Fear to Think Outside the Box? And why do we follow the herd instead? Where you can both listen to all of our past webinars for the next webinar and also register for your complimentary consultation online, ronaldgielach.com. That's G-E-L-O-K. And thanks for being with us, Ron.
Oh, thanks for being with me, too.
Wonderful.